Hello, welcome to Games Industry. We've got Casilda today with us. She's a technical artist and animator and a teacher at the Hochschule für Seniors in Cologne. And she's going to talk to us about the basics of technical artistry, the process of converting 3D models and other artist pieces to workable assets in a games engine. Welcome, Casilda.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So the first thing that came to my mind when I started making this was, okay, I have to write down everything that I think that is technically important for any kind of art department. But then I realized that becomes the length of a whole semester of teaching. So this is going to be very condensed, and I won't tackle everything, unfortunately. But I hope that some of the insights that I have are useful for you, because the technical aspect of art is something that that is as relevant as the skill of the crafting. That hence the title. You are good at drawing. Now what? Because you might find yourself as an artist, or when you're starting in the industry, that okay, you know proportions, you know colors, shapes, what looks good, what doesn't, how an animation can look better, but not quite what is the step towards putting it into an engine, making it work anywhere. And that kind of stuff is as relevant for us, for our industry. So let me start with this. Just a thing before, if I have to stop for a moment because I ran out of voice or something. I was just sick the whole week. I'm fine now. That's why I'm doing this talk. But you still hear me a little bit. It's not my real voice yet. So anyways, let's begin if it starts now. Okay. So I'm Casilda de Zulueta. I'm Spanish. I live in Germany for already like 6-7 years. I forgot already. You can call me Casi. It's easier. Don't try to Americanize it. It's Casi like in German, like C-A-S-I, and that's fine. The real name is way longer, but that's only on my ID. I'm a technical artist and animator. I didn't start in the industry as a technical artist. I did start as an animator, but that was like side part of it. And yeah, I can't remember how long I've been in Germany, but I remember that I'm more than 6 years in the games industry. Before that, I was doing some TV broadcast work, because well, this is my icon. I put it everywhere, and I decided that instead of having business cards this time, I have stickers. It's a shame I can just give you some, because this has to be online. As my academic background, I studied a bachelor in social sciences called audiovisual communication. It's the equivalent of media studies, with a lot of practical part on it. And I did that in the Polytechnic University of my city, of where I come from. And as a bachelor final project, I decided to make a point-and-click adventure game on a girl that wants to play Papageno in the Magic Flute adaptation for her school, but the math teacher won't let her because, you know, she's a girl, the character is a boy. Not many boys are going to play theater, so why not allow them to take the cool characters? Yeah, the prototype was fun to make, but I actually did it during my Erasmus exchange. Already in Germany, I came to KISD, to the Köln International School of Design, in the then called Fachhochschule Köln. I spent a year there. I did a lot of stuff, and I then met the peers that I would join 2 years later as I was starting my master's in game development and research in the Cologne Game Lab. For that, I'm finishing up a project that is completely opposite kind of art style. I'm going horror adventure game, and this is a picture of the creature that is guarding the exit of the house that you are in, which is an adaptation of Picasso's most famous painting, the Guernica. Not sure if you know it. It's a black and white, huge painting that is a depiction of the pain of the bombing from the fascists during the civil war in Spain. So before I finished my master's, I started in 2017 working at Flying Ship Studios, which is a company that makes HTML5 games. I joined as a 3D artist, which is like the generic term for doing from modeling to texture, rigging, and animation. Because of my background in audiovisual communication, I have a little bit of expertise on video editing, so I was like gradually in charge of more of the PR video stuff in the company during my 3 years there. And in that period, in 3 years, I made more than 30 games. I became an expert on the Lego Ninjago series. Somehow, I think I made like 5 or 6 projects. Music is awesome. I had a lot of fun. And as you can see, it's mobile first, it's HTML5 games. It had to run in devices from 2012. The poly count had to be to the limits. The amount of bones per character had to be limited to 17. There were a lot of technical constraints for making the art look good. And that was a very interesting challenge. That made me focus a lot on optimization, on being smart around the assets that I produce as an artist. So without causality or correlation, I left the company by 2020. Don't know what else happened there, but it doesn't have anything to do with it. Because I wanted to do something bigger, but also specialized. And I ended up progressively becoming a technical artist, which is, as a definition, is the bridge between a programmer and an artist. But I actually don't have to code the game. The kind of programming that I do is mostly shaders. As you are seeing in this video in the background, there is an outline shader on the 3D objects here and there. That's a custom shader I had to make for this prototype. We're still working on it. Sorry. But yeah, I also had to lead the 3D department. Oh, it's not looping, or it's not loading. It's not loading. I also did the animations for the 3D stuff. Like there is a sorry. There's a coffee machine that has its own life and spirit in it. I animated that, made a shader with the with the water caustics that you can see there. Things here and there. I'm more comfortable in those shoes. And as Daniel has said, I'm also a teacher. I teach animation at Hochschule Fresenius in Cologne, which is fun, but it's 101 animation. So I have to start with the 12 fundamentals and what is the difference between that and animating for games. I'm not sure if I will have time for explaining all of that stuff, the differences, because they are very interesting, but it's also part of, I guess, of your studies. I'm gonna try to know you a little bit better in a moment. So the project that you're seeing in the background is Mars Vice, an adventure game that is still under development. I'm working currently on a horribly complicated rig and animation system for Enclose Encounter, which is a VR project in which you have to feed and survive your pet. And I did work for the prototype of Maniacs, which was developed by Achtung Autobahn. I was still a 3D artist then. I did basically everything 3D that was, sorry, that was in that project. My voice is terrible, but actually I don't feel bad. So this is, winter. Because I love animation in all its shapes, I also did cinematics animation for the Seventh Act, which is another under development project from Brainseed Factory. As you can see, I started in 2020 and still all of the projects that I've been working on, is that all? I think so. Still are not released because games take years to make. This is some of the facial expressions of the pet. Its name is Barnabas, BB for short. It's adorable and at the same time terrible. Too many feet, too many IKs, but I'm having a lot of fun trying to figure this out. So what else do I do? Just 3D art and illustration and video and web design for the sake of it. I'm not doing it for selling it. I'm not doing it as a job. One of the reasons that I left behind being a 3D artist was that I wanted to have that side of my creativity for myself, for fun, as I used to do before I started saying, oh, this is going to be my job, this is going to be my career. It's okay to change paths as many times as you need, even industries. It's fine. I mean, web design is because it's something that I was doing when I was in the bachelor, and I'm making games. It's not that big of a leap, but it works. If it's something that satisfies you, it will work. One thing, I wouldn't recommend going freelance as a junior, because you have to start with a good salary, and you can't start with a good salary if you're a junior. What else? Yeah, animation, even if I love it as well, it's not something that drains me as a job, but I did find this burnout, this problem with, I had to make all of these models, and then when I was home, I didn't have the feeling for doing the fun art or the stuff that I was having fun doing years before this was my profession. So I switched it to something more managerial and also more technical, because it's fun in a different way. All right, enough about me. The purpose of this talk, I want to point at the technical aspects of game art. So you are an artist and you're still having to do technical stuff because you're an artist in game development. To make you consider being methodological in your artistic processes, I will give you general tips for everyone, and this is something that will go with you throughout your whole career if you apply them. And this is a side quest of mine, but I have to do that in every single talk that I give. I have to remind you, especially artists, that your value is not attached to your productivity. Your value as a person doesn't have to do anything with how much you can deliver. You always deserve a rest, and you always deserve to do things just for fun, like the stuff that I was doing there. And of course, crunch is horrible. Crunch is nonsense, and it only shows exploitative manners from the managers or the bosses of the company. Don't confuse a game jam with friends and spending 12 hours non-stop working with taking it as a lifestyle. That's a different thing. And also, if you want to finish a game jam, take this tip: go to sleep. The only way I could finish any game jam game was by forcing myself to just go. I'm tired, I'm going to sleep, I will continue tomorrow. You lower the scope, but also you actually finish. The other way around, it never works, at least for me. So I can't see people. Can I see people? Yes. Also, for the ones that are on the call, I would like to know what kind of artist do you want to be? Can you write it, for example, in the chat? Can I see the chat? Yes, I can see it. It can be more than one, if I'm not sure.
For me, it would be a 2D artist. I'm now louder. I'm currently a 2D artist and a UI artist. Not the 3D artist side yet, but maybe in the future I want to be able to do that as well.
Okay. Who's missing? Everybody answered already? I mean, you don't have to. It's just to have a hint of the kind of interest that you have. I was expecting more concept artists, like at least 2, because something that I've seen as a tendency is that because we start in this industry without knowing exactly what kind of tools we have to put ourselves into, the most comfortable idea is the one that uses the same tools that you were using before you started doing games, which is pencils and paper, like doing concept, drawing all the time. It's very easy to get to think that that's your future. Maybe you are into other stuff. Yes, I said now I am no longer a 3D artist, but I was a 3D artist, and that included being an animator. And the 2D colleagues that I have, most of them also did UI. So it's a good start to have a little bit of more of a bigger umbrella of things that you can make, especially for indies that require so many hats. All right. So I'm sorry, Daniel, we're not going to tackle technical art for this talk because I didn't expect anyone to become a technical artist. But we can talk about that afterwards, like if you have questions in a specific. So let's go. That was the purpose of the talk. But the purpose of your work as an artist is a communicative process. You want to communicate with the player, and you have to communicate with the machine in order to communicate with the player. The kind of stuff that you do for an audience is the art, is for them to find a meaning. It can be appealing, it can be disgusting, it has spikes, so I know I'll get hurt if I enter its collision zone. It's yellow if it's climbable. An extreme of this design, for example, is in Mirror's Edge, in which everything is basically pure colors that excuse me, that guide you directly through all the possibilities that you have for going around the level. But in a less direct way, it's even in The Last of Us. Your objectives are always yellow. It doesn't have to be yellow. It just became kind of a standard in AAA for the recent years, but it's not everywhere. It's like the art has a communicative meaning, and it's necessary that you collaborate as an artist with the level designers, with the game designers, as to identify what are the colors and shapes that will mean certain things in the context of the game. But also, in the asset that you're producing is for a machine to interpret, is for it to render, for it to show it on a screen. So the most important thing is to have into account is the target device, because it will constrain the poly count, how big the atlases, the textures can be, What are the rendering effects that you have available? Can you do post-processing? Can you not? Why? And what is the color space? You want HDR, you can't in Switch for now. That kind of stuff. Also, the point of view, where the camera is, and how far it is, and screen size directly, like physically, will restrict the level of detail. Something that a lot of accessibility advocates have complained a lot, have been complaining a lot in the about many games, is that you couldn't change the size of the subtitles, because usually people will play in smaller screens or far away from the screen, and then the UI was so small that it was impossible to read. So maybe something adaptive will be better. But it's something that you have to take into account in the UI design. I am not a UI designer, but you will see some technical stuff for the 2D department that is also applicable in UI. Chat. Okay. All right. The bigger your files, the more space the game will occupy. That is a problem. People can't have many games in their computers because they get bigger and bigger and bigger, but the smaller your game is, the less they will mind that it's installed, the more accessible it will be. If it's constantly online, like the HTML5 games, that whenever you erase the cache, it has to download again. It really has to be low, small size, because imagine that they have to use their data every single time. That's not accessible. And you as an artist, so talking about development process, you as an artist are responsible for your asset from when you are creating it until you leave it to the next artist or to the level designer or to the programmers to do whatever on it. So League of Legends is for PC, but it's a top-down view. The characters are super small. Do you think there is face rig in those models in specific? Like they can smile in the middle of the battle or look at you angrily. That model in specific in the middle of the screen. Those don't have a rig. The face, the body, yes, the face. It's something that you're not going to put detail into because it's not going to be visible. And so the device and the point of view is going to constrain all of the things that you do around it. So ask yourself always when you tackle creating something, what am I making this for? I'm making a chair so players can sit on it. I'm reusing the material for the matching table, so I don't have to create a new material. I'm making the seat height universally at the same height, so no matter if it's this particular chair or another chair or a sofa or another element in which player can sit down, it still works. The animator doesn't have to make exceptional animations for each of the seats. And I'm putting the pivot point at the same distance from the front. So, don't get sick. That's another advice. Take care of yourself. So the pivot point at the same distance from the front, so the knees won't clip through the seat. The character will target to the same distance of the center of the object. It's how animation logic works when you want target animations. So let's just start with the details. This is going to be a little bit dense How many of you have done this? And this. And then you have in the mesh, in that FBX, the mesh name is Q007. And the file that you are in which you are creating, the Blender file in which you are creating the FBX is called assets34. And the albedo or diffuse texture is called wood PNG. Today, maybe you remember what is what. Tomorrow, perhaps. Next week, you will start forgetting. In a month, you have forgotten everything. And whoever has to put their hands on this in your team will just be really mad at you because they won't be able to find absolutely anything. Why do I start with naming conventions? Because if you can't name your stuff first, how are you going to work on them? You could go with having the chair space 03 FBX, that the mesh name is called exactly the same as the FBX. It comes in, you have been doing all the chairs in a Blender file, and the texture is called wood07, the albedo. Or you can use the Unreal naming conventions, which you can just Google Unreal naming conventions, and then you get to see all of the prefixes and suffixes that you can use for them. The FBX is called the same as the mesh. SM means static mesh. D for diffuse, because it's the texture, it's not the material. Diffuse wood 07, because it's using the 7th texture of wood textures, the generic wood textures that you have. Folder structures in your project. How does that look? I've seen it worse, but I didn't want to get you more confused. This is not nice. So pet peeve, name always in camel case, or always in lowercase, or always with the spaces, or always without the spaces, but set to a specific name and be very rigid with it. The more strict you are with that, the less time you will have to lose looking for the stuff that you want to work on. This is how I think that's it. Yeah, this is how it should look for only assets. In a 3D game with UI, you have the characters, the environment, and the props. You have the UI, and in each of them you have materials, and inside the materials the textures. You also have meshes for the non-UI, and you have also animations specifically for the characters. If the animations are and the animations are outside of the NPC or player folder, because if you're smart enough, you will use just one skeleton for all of the characters, including the player. Maybe with different LODs, with less bones for the NPCs because they are not as relevant, but the less exceptions you have for animation, the better. So how you won't get lost with all of this information, because you don't have to have it in memory. You will have an asset list with different tabs, an Excel with different tabs, a tab for characters, a tab for environment, a tab for props, and another one for animations in a specific, let's say it's asset name, working file name, what type of asset it is. If you will have to dialogue with the game designer for that. But as with the example of chair, is because there is a mechanic in which the player character can sit. So you have to create one specific type of asset that is for sitting, and the materials, they can be used in different ones, doesn't matter. And one last thing, these are common things for absolutely every single artist. You should be very strict with the naming convention. You should be very strict with the folder structure. You should keep track of your asset production with the asset list. And it is technically necessary to know how to store your stuff in the cloud and how to version control, not to the levels of a programmer, but at least to interact with the rest of your team. So storage in the cloud is for the edit files. It's for the Blender files, the Maya, the PSDs, the Affinity Design. What is this one called? Substance Painter. It can be, these providers. It can be Drive, it can be Dropbox, Nextcloud, OneCloud. There are many. I think there is one that is called Sync. Can look them up. Most likely your university has one. The thing is that whatever is local, if you have the program open, it is synchronized with the cloud files. It is exactly the same copy. What is the current one in the cloud and the one in your folders. Files that you don't use won't occupy space in your local disk, so you don't have to worry about running out of space in your hard disk. It's always good to do backups from time to time, but that's another story. And you are working directly on those files because whenever you Control S, whenever you save, a new version is being uploaded. But you can always go and search in history in case, oh no, I shouldn't have done this. I want to undo this last hour of work, and that version of the file will be there. It's been so long since last time I worked local only that it kind of feels like I'm an orphan if I do something just directly on and save it on the desktop. The peace of mind that it gives to just not mind what version it is, it's perfect. And also that avoids the issue with having final 2, final for sure, final this one, this, because the last one that you export is the one that you're going to have in the storage. If you want to retrieve an older one, you can just go to the file history in the application of the cloud. On the other hand, you have the version control. That's for the project files. It's your Unity project or your Unreal project. Unreal and Git don't work very well together, but well, it's anything that goes into the engine project folder, with some exceptions, but those are not relevant for you as an artist. Those are something that the programmer will put in the Git exception, Git ignore file. Your version, whatever you're working on the computer, is local. It doesn't change any other version anywhere else until you commit the file and you push it in the cloud, in the version control cloud. All commits are retrievable no matter how far in time. You can fork, you can do all of that kind of stuff. If you don't understand that language, the thing is that you will only push in Git or in Bitbucket or in Plastic. You will only push those changes that you are sure that are bug-free, that it's the version that you want for this phase of the development. So others can work on that one. You will first commit, then pull the changes that your colleagues have done, then you will push your changes. There can be conflicts. For example, if 2 people work in the same scene, that's why you have to be communicative with your team and always call dibs on the scene. And I'm working on the corridor, don't open that file. Fine. There are also tools for project management, but that's That's an accessory. That's it for the. How good are we with time? Really? Wow. Gotta go fast. Okay, concept art. Too much text, right? Number your concepts. You have 20 drawings, you number each of the drawings, and then the art director is going to give you excellent feedback. I like number 3, but make it rounder like 7. Name your layers and groups, and that also applies for the 2D artists, for the UI artists, for the 3D artists that are doing textures. If you are working in Photoshop and then you see Ebene 24, oh yeah, that's the one I was looking for. Instead of naming it, you know, what they are, it's chaotic. It's very hard to navigate through. So you also have to, inside your projects, inside your Blender file, inside your Photoshop file, you have to name correctly your elements. Keep the same proportions from all views. So whoever does concept art, please make it make sense. Your drawing from your drawing from the side should coincide with the drawing from the front. You not only can, you have to use references, because creativity comes from how you assemble the pieces, how you put them together, the pieces of reality that the game is portraying or is referencing. Without references, when we are going on, I will just use my imagination because I'm an artist. Our mind is not pure reason, especially when it comes to art. We will fall in stereotypes, we will fall in unconscious biases, we will do things inaccurately because memory is there to mess up with you. It's not reality, it's just whatever we remember from reality. And I'm putting an example of Blasphemous. The Game Kitchen is a Sevillian company, south of Spain. They have a very specific Baroque and Gothic, but Baroque painting influence, very, very specific from that area, from that region. And they did a lot of research. They come from Sevilla, they could have said, we already know all of these things, but no, they did a lot of research in order to do the things right. And that's how you have this very folkloric and fidel kind of game art. It requires research. Specific to character concept art, whoever makes character concept art, the character will have to move, with the exception of a visual novel, but you not only make art for visual novels. The joints need to make sense. How are you going to rotate it? It doesn't matter if the character is going to be in 2D or 3D. If they move, they will have to move from somewhere. Can they bend the knees or elbows with a piece of armor? Think about how realistic it is that someone can wear that and be able to move. A good thing to test also for giving the kind of mood that the game is going to have is to draw also extreme faces and body expressions, a little bit like the character layouts from cartoons. It's not that common when you are starting with just simply conceptualizing the general shape and the clothing of a character, but a little bit more advanced in the development. It's very interesting to see, before you animate, before you model the whole thing, how it might work with those proportions. For props and environment, it is necessary to learn technical drawing. So those vistas, the side, the front, the back, the top, really makes sense. And don't fear cheating. Use all the tools at your disposal. You can block out the environments in Blender and make a render, put a camera, render it, and then you just trace on top, because it's concept. It's not a piece of art that you are making so you become a better artist in making backgrounds. It's industrial work. Eat up the pride and, you know, save yourself hours of fixing the lines because the perspective is not working correctly. To the art. Ooh, we are getting somewhere. Resolution for anything. This applies also on UI. It is always power of 2. And they don't have to be a square. Power of 2, it's 2 by 2 pixels, or 4, or 8, 16, 32, blah, 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 until 8K, but 8K is not that used. Better not, better cap it at 4K. And they don't have to be a square. You can make, yeah, as those examples, make it rectangular, vertical or horizontal, it doesn't matter. But those numbers are necessary. Why? Because sometimes it will just not render at all. There will be devices in which the game just goes, I don't know how to show this. It just breaks, and compression doesn't work as well, and the whole game will explode. It will just get too big suddenly because the powers being don't know how to handle that. So power of 2. Resolution can be for that power of 2 can be for an individual asset, or it can be for a collection of assets arranged into an atlas. It can be for the pieces of a character when you have it animated puppet-like, as this example from Mosquito Bit. It can be the whole sprite sheet of a character. That atlas has to be power of 2. What else? Can be like 9 types of wood texture. So you will only use one wood material, and the objects will just be UV'd into the different quarters. Find a balance. It has to be big enough to not scale up in game. Otherwise the image will blur. Usually the upscaling by default is bilinear, so you have a linear gradient between pixel and pixel when it becomes bigger, but it has to be small enough not to not eat up resources rendering. The smaller the better, but the cap on how small your textures have to be is on when it stops looking good. If it doesn't make a difference visually to have the texture at 512 than at 4K, export the texture at 512. Okay, the exception with scaling up is when you work in pixel art, which has the advantage of being super tiny if you want to go with the pixel as the image. And the scaling up is crisp. It's not with the filters. Reusability. The more you can reuse an asset, the better. Extreme example is from the first Super Mario game. The clouds are also the bushes. Do you know this one? I love it. They had very little space in those cartridges. Wow. '3D art. Modeling. there are more polygons in the nose of Noctis than in the whole body of Spyro, and probably of the assets that are in the background. It's not only a matter of this game was made in 1998, which it affects, and this one in 2016. It's also how big the screen is. Again, the target devices. The target device for Spyro the Dragon was, I forgot what was the aspect ratio of PlayStation 1, but it was like around 400 something. It was tiny. So those triangles that we see very clear now, and that texture that is a little bit messed up, actually look quite good for the screens and for the resolution that used to be in the 90s. But if you were to make, before I do that, but if you were to make a mobile game, you might lean towards making something as polydense as Spyro the Dragon more than the Final Fantasy 15, if you want it to run in most of the phones that are currently being used. The problem with tiny triangles. So let's imagine that you don't have any triangle constraint, like polycount constraint, in the sense that GPUs for the target devices that we are using, first of all, are available in the market, but also like they can run infinity of them, or with a new Unreal 5. Well, I'm not sure about how they solve this problem in particular, but that kind of thing with doesn't matter for you. The problem with tiny triangles is that the computer is going to calculate anyways those triangles and then output absolutely nothing. When there are too many tiny triangles, the render looks also edgy. It has some artifacts like glitching, and yeah, this is a visualization of what it does. So first of all, the computer has to say there is a vertex here, a vector here, a vector here, and they draw a triangle. This triangle calls this material, and the material is telling me how the triangle is going to render. The material here is green, and the other triangle is orange. So let me see, for this texel, for this pixel in the screen, I'm going to render first on the top, okay, green, and then the one on the right, orange, and so on and so on, and then it goes to the next one. But when the triangles, the same mesh, super tiny, so tiny that they have to fight for rendering just one pixel, it's not worth it. You could also just have one triangle or none. And because you have two, which have two different colors, what it's going to do in live rendering is that it will flicker sometimes green, sometimes orange, because it doesn't know which one is more important. It depends on which one will occupy more space inside the texture. Anyways, avoid tiny triangles. And how do you do that? With LODs, with level of detail. The meshes farther away load a lower poly version of the same character, object, whatever. You can also do that with textures that are called Schnitt maps. They do something similar. The farther away the texture that has to render, the smaller it is being compressed directly in the engine. You don't have to do them manually. For the LOD meshes, yeah, I have time, at least for the 3D part. For the LOD meshes, there's a 50-50. Some engines do LODs quite well, some others don't do them at all. It's better that you work on the LODs yourself in your 3D software authoring tool. So the textures, if they are super big but they are farther away, it's the same principle. They are conflicting. They don't know, like the computer doesn't know which part of the texture has to render. So it will just flicker constantly and make very strange moire patterns and stuff like that. But you can also have LODs with bones and frame rate. The farther away an object, the harder it will be to notice that it has a lower frame rate. And also, like if League of Legends happened as a game mechanic between over-the-shoulder camera and having this very far away shot, the normal, the one from above, would have a bone count way lower than when we have these shots from behind the shoulder. But you have to find the balance, and this is a very technical stuff, but if you understand at least the principle, it's fine. The more assets you have to put into the game, so all the versions with the LODs, all the textures with the mipmaps, all the bone, different skeleton targets, it will be heavier on the memory of the machine. But if you have less LODs, that means that you have more triangles in proportion. Even if the characters are farther away, they still have the same poly count and the same triangles, the same textures, the same bones. So it's going to take up work on the GPU, on the graphics card. Something I didn't put in this presentation, but it's very important. Remember this ratio. A skin mesh, a mesh that has bones, costs 10 times more to render than a static mesh. Whatever you can animate without using bones, but using directly the engine tools, like rotating the object, and that's okay, the better. The less skin meshes, the better. If you have crowds, you will really need to sort on LODs, like the zombie crowds and so on. Even nowadays, it's very costly. So, if you don't mind that I talk a little bit longer, because I want to be done with all of this. Modularity. Document and apply strict measurements. How high is the seat of the chair for the characters to sit down? What's the measure of the narrowest corridor for the character should go through? How tall is a wall? All of those measures are established in the GDD or in the technical documentation that you have for artists. And you have to be, if you are an environment artist or an architectural artist, you have to be very strict with the measurements of everything that you make. If not, it will have that fighting with overlapping faces, and things won't be modular anymore. It will be hard to put them together. Be strict with that. Something to take into account is if a fraction of a mesh is visible, the whole mesh is being calculated. It just doesn't show. At how much should I chop a house, for example? And it again depends on the point of view. You remember, target device, point of view, target device, constraints, point of view, constraints. Point of view, are you going to be close to it? Then chop it, because then if you are seeing the door and part of the wall, you are not calculating the window that is somewhere there. But if the other extreme, the figure is in the landscape far away, just make it a quad and slap a texture in it. That's it. Doesn't even have to have depth. It can be just a quad in the very background. Somewhere in between, something in between, less chopped objects, because you don't need that much modularity for things that are that far away. It's project dependent. All of the stuff that we make as artists has a purpose. Texturing and adding materials, and like in the poly count, the texture size, the smaller the better. The less textures per material, the better. You can condense your information about metallicity, specularity, roughness, depending on the system of the rendering system that it's being used. You can store all of that stuff, and also a bake of the ambient occlusion. You can store all of that stuff, each of them in one of the channels of the PBR map. What you're seeing here is the default share that comes in Unreal. Don't know if you're familiar with that one, but like it's texture for the levels. I don't remember which one is one, but the levels of metallicity and roughness and all that kind of stuff is in each of the channels. So the red one is roughness, I'm gonna say. Have no idea. And it includes the alpha. So the alpha is also a channel that is telling you how much metallic something is. I don't remember which channel is which for Unreal right now from the top of my head. Of course, memory fails. You always have to put them in documentation so you can look it up. UV space. You have 2 UV spaces for static meshes, not for animated ones. The main UV map and the light map and the unwrap can't coincide. You can just rotate the main UV map if there is no overlapping UVs, and that will do the trick. If there are overlapping, of course, the light map has to be a different unwrap. Unreal does an okay light map. No, Unreal doesn't recognize that, doesn't make it. Okay, Unreal needs a light map that you make it. Unity doesn't light map on its own, so it's better if you customize it in Blender. The same as with LODs. You have the possibility of doing it in engine, but the smartest way is to, not the smartest, no, that's always context dependent. It always looks better if you do it directly in Maya or in Blender or in 3D Max, whatever the tool you're using for 3D. Material instances. That also applies for the 2D, for the UI, because you need a material in order to also display the different elements. The fewer materials, the better. But again, you need to balance. Big atlases with tons of assets using the same material, or small texture maps with more materials in a scene. The first one means more work for the GPU, more or less. If there are fewer, maybe it's even less. The smaller one is more okay for the GPU, but it puts work on the memory. You're always balancing GPU, memory. Consider tiling and triplanar projection. If you don't know what triplanar projection is that instead of using the UVs, you are just saying, project me this texture from above, from one side, and from front or behind. Like, so 3 planes are put together in the object. So it's very useful for walls and floors, instead of having to unwrap them, have the material specifically tile up for the size of the object, having a material for the different sizes of the object. Forget about that. You just have this material that is just projecting the texture or the different textures that are rendering, because you can also use a normal map, you can also use a PBR, and avoid at almost all costs multi-material meshes. For each material, it has a new pass, the object. That means that it will have to render twice. If a skin mesh costs already 10 times more than a static mesh, it has 3 materials, it means that it costs 30 times more to render than a static mesh with a single material. It's better to duplicate a quad than to force double-sided render. Because usually, for example, if you have a tree, if you have, it's better to duplicate them. Yeah, you will have also the object rendering like it's inside the trunk, or I don't know, you have a chair that has a pattern texture that is transparent clipping alpha, but it's only on the back. But the whole object has to render both sides. That's more expensive as well. You will have to stop me at some point, but I can continue going with this. Always apply transforms, rotation at 0, scale at 1, and put your pivot points where I can see them. Where do they belong? To the bottom corner of the wall asset, so you can snap them to the grid, to the center of a basketball or any object that is going to rotate on itself, to the center of a rotation point, and it's aligned with the main rotation axis. For example, a door, it will be on the hinge, so it has its transforms like this. So instead of animating it weirdly with the different axes working at the same time, you are just saying rotate my object in the y-axis, and it will rotate. You have glasses. The legs of the glasses, when you open them, you know, the transform, the pivot point has to be aligned with the main rotation axis. And I'm just showing you this. Of course, I will share these slides for you. I will send the link to Daniel so you can take a look. This is a major important exporting settings from Blender to Unity and Blender to Unreal. I'm talking Blender a lot because it's my main tool. I'm not afraid of Maya. It's just that indies won't pay usually for the Maya license. So these are the settings, but in any case, there is this wonderful asset creation toolset add-on that for static meshes, it automates all of this stuff. So you won't have to remember anything, just to say, export me object per FBX, and it's for Unity or it's for Unreal. It only works for these two, and it also has a little bit more of tools, but it's very, very useful. If you can tip also the author has removed so many headaches from my workflow, and yes, exactly. Last but not least, bone's main role, the same as with the door hinge rotation axis, your bone role is as important for the characters. As you can see in the arm T-pose, the main rotation point for the shoulder is going to be here. So that's why I'm using the X-axis there, but it's rotated 90 degrees for the forearm because the main rotation axis is this one. And that's it. I'm just consistent in which is my usual rotation for each of the bones of a character. The hand is again rotating up and down. So you see the axes in the presentation, right? Same goes for the legs, same goes for any bone. This is very important because it will be easier to debug when you have issues with your animations. There are two wolves inside me. one is Euler and the other is quaternion rotations. There is a graphics problem, computer graphics problem here that I will not expand too much, but if you want to be able to edit your animations, how are they called this? The Beziers, to have proper acceleration and deceleration in the independent axes of movement, you will have to change your keying in Euler for those bones. The problem comes with rotations that are farther than 180, because computers do different things to that. Like rotating more than 180 in Euler means different things to the machines than to us humans, and therefore we are using quaternions for a main body that is like a main bone that is going to rotate the whole character. For example, for if your character is going to roll or spin, that kind of stuff, and you want to animate it yourself in the animator, add an extra bone between the main bone, the hip, and the root bone, and keep that one in quaternions. It will be harder for you to modify the curves, the animation curves for that specific bone, but it removes the problem with the 180 flipping rotations. That's it. That's the tip. The rest of the bones usually Euler, and the order. I didn't write that one. So that you can also have the problem with, which is called gimbal lock, which means that you try to rotate in one axis and it does nothing. The way you have to arrange the Euler is from less important rotation axis to more important. So usually you will use two, and the third one most likely won't move at all. And therefore, even if you are gimbal locked, you won't need it. It won't be necessary for you. Controllers or drivers are your animator's friends. It automates legs rotation with IK feet, closing hand with different increments on each finger. So you can just say, I'm rotating this one, or this one, or a controller on top of this finger, and I want each individual bone to be rotating at different increments. And that one doesn't have to be manually. You can have a driver that targets all of these individual, a driver per bone that says, hey, if this rotates this controller here, then make this bone and this one and this one and this one rotate one individually. It takes longer to set up, but it's way easier to animate afterwards. Also, you can add drivers to the key shapes, which is when you don't have bones for modifications, but it's stored in the mesh information, but you only want it to appear if the, I don't know, for example, having double chin, if you have your neck low, that means that when this bone triggers, or when the angle of the head is inferior to alpha, then make the mesh in this area go lower. And it will do that automatically, and it will export in the baking, and it will be perfect. For the animation, before you even start animating, design a state machine. This is an example of Barnabas, the horrible, beautiful creature that I'm animating nowadays, because this will help you understand what are the systems that you need to animate for and how much you have to divide it. What are the very important animations first for prototyping, and then how you can go with the least relevant. Very fast block out before you polish. So like when you do 3D assets or 2D, before you start making the beautiful colors and the shapes and so on, you just drop boxes and spheres into a scene, and people can start, like your colleagues can start programming and level designing and all kind of stuff. And at some point you will arrive with your final objects. With animation, it's the same. You might start in an engine that has some pre-made animations, which is awesome. But the sooner you have your specific animations for your specific character, the better. And the sooner means that you will just have them first raw, no secondary motion, no hair moving, just it's a running cycle, and then we are establishing, okay, I need to make it less long feet distance, or I need to make it shorter, or I need to give it another personality because this is not gonna work in this direction. And slowly you polish those animations, because that means that at least you have the animations, and then you can finish them up and slice the animations on demand. If you need to separate anticipation from the action, from recovery of a slash with a sword, then do it. If it's not necessary, then have it in one action. That depends on the necessities of the project. And just my 2 last cents, and I will be done with my, I went too far. And I left so much out. Art has never not been technical. It's not even in games, but in anything. The painters need to know their tools. They need to know the canvas. They need to understand the materials that they are using. It's not the same painting with oil and with painting with tempera than painting with watercolors. The same happens with game art. Do not be afraid of getting more technical, even though you don't aspire to become a technical artist. But the more technical you are, the better of an asset you will be for a company, because that will remove a lot of work from the developers, who are usually the bottlenecks in projects. Not because they are slow, but because they have to be the technical ones. So everything has to run through them. The less work you put on their shoulders, the faster everything will go in the development of your games. So do your power of 2. Consider this target device. Consider point of view, and don't go too far with the triangle size. And always rest, never crunch, and especially never crunch for money. To hell with that. I know this changes a little bit the topic from today, but I have to say it in this one and any other talk that I give. You want to live beyond your 60s, you don't crunch. That's it. Take care of yourself. First comes health. If not now, when are we going to learn about that, right? And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for listening to me. One last thing, if any girl or a non-conforming gender person is interested, I'm also part of the organization team of Defend Devs Meetup, which is, as you can see by its name, networking community of women and other minorities in the games industry in Germany. So feel free to join. Thank you so much. And if there are questions.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, do you have time for some questions?
Yeah, of course.
Cool. Excellent. So anyone in chat, you can unmute yourself. And any questions here, you can also speak. Or you can use the chat if you prefer not to speak. The first question that I have, Casilda, is regarding the pivot. You had a wonderful slide about what the different kinds of where pivots should be on models. And what was missing there was some like a character. I was just wondering if you have like what your recommendation is for where humanoid characters pivot should be.
Right. Characters, I would recommend that they have the same pivot point as the skeleton. So, yeah, at 0. Some people leave it at the hips, but things that are offset might end up giving problems. Also, if you have more than one mesh for the same skeleton, but it's not exactly the same size, and you move somewhere the pivot, it has to be in the center, so coinciding with the skeleton, and the skeleton has to have a root bone that is not attached to anything, but it's just there because games. The root bone is not exactly that, but kinda is the center origin point of the collision mesh for the object in the engine. With some exceptions, because when you do root motion animation in Unreal, it doesn't mean that you are animating the root bone. You are animating the skeleton as an object, but that's oddly specific. But yeah, characters at 0.
That's at the feet of the character?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, any other questions? I can keep going. So regarding version control, you outlined 2 different approaches, using a personal cloud account, or using what I assume is the team's version control, like using the Git. It's also where the project is stored for storing like Blender project files or any other stuff. So my experience is that artists just possibly around here, possibly everywhere, just prefer to use something akin to a USB stick. Like, here's my file, I'll send it to you via email or via whatever. Like, maybe put it in a Drive folder if you're lucky. But
no.
What's your experience with having an artist use the team's official like version control, like Git, like committing all Blender project file changes to Git?
Okay, no, Blender files are to be stored in, like, the way I ended up working with these freelancing with these studios, but also in my experience with Flying Ship as a 3D artist. So we have like 2 spaces. One is the project, which has only the files that belong to the project. So for an artist, the FBX and the exported PNGs. I don't think I'm missing anything else. For the other part is the working files, which may have a copy as well of the FBXs, because the last export also you export it in the cloud just in case. But I think it makes life easier for everyone if you are the one who is depositing exactly the file that you wanted to put in the project in the folder that it belongs to. So you have, for example, Dropbox, and you have your assets, 3D Blender files, characters, player, NPCs. In each of the folders you have your blend files. A little bit up in the hierarchy you have for the textures, you have a folder that is textures, and it's like PSD files and the export textures, and all of that kind of stuff is there, and it's being uploaded every time that you save. So, oh no, it got corrupted again. Thank you, Adobe. You go to the version history and you retrieve the one that you had 5 minutes ago. But that's not the end, and nobody else should be swimming in that pool of working files. It's messy. It ends up being messy even with a correct folder structure.
Yes.
So if there is more people having to interact with it, the harder it is. So once you have exported your FBX, for example, you just move it, drag it to the folder of the project, commit, pull the changes from your colleagues and push, and that's it. And actually, if you are making, I mean, that's not all of it. You will open Unity or will open Unreal, and you will see the FBX, how it looks inside the engine. You will apply the material with the texture that you have for it.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that stuff is the artist's job. As a manager, because I'm the lead for the Marswise project, I don't have to touch individually each of the textures and putting it in each of the materials. And no, that's each of the artists that are putting their stuff, and they are only pushing when they are sure that their object works, when their object has the material, when it's named correctly. If not, they know what will happen to them, and that's it. And they will do their pushes. Is what they are not going to do, for example, is forks. You know, that's a little bit more advanced. That's usually only necessary for when two developers are working at the same time in different areas of the code, or if a game designer wants to experiment with something without touching, you know, without hurting the rest of the project. So they fork the game designers. The artists, I haven't seen the need, but the delivery of an asset is putting it in the project, putting the material on it, making sure it works, then pressing commit, pull, push. That's it. And no email you this, and no USB that. That's how you lose your project.
Right.
Yeah. Also, how are you going to know that your chair is not 4 meters tall because there was an issue with the importing or the exporting, unless you open it and try it, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. I was just wondering if it ever happens that like two artists, like multiple artists using the same Blender project files.
No.
But if that's just if that's very uncommon, then I guess it's fine. They each have their own like clouds.
Yeah. What you can have is linked objects from file to file. So I have my peer assets linked here. They are just like mirrors of what the other person has, and if I refresh the scene, it will refresh with the latest things that are there, but I am not touching their object. Why would I, as an artist, want to work on the plant that somebody else is making?
Well, I mean, just maybe there's a problem with the asset and it needs to be fixed. And the older artist was run over by a bus or something like that. Maybe they're sick for the week and it needs fixing right now.
Yeah, but that's fine. Then if somebody else has to take over, but that doesn't mean that two artists are working on the same file simultaneously.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, but for that, then your files have to be clean. Or even for yourself, if you work on a project, then go on vacation. Please go on vacation. It's very necessary. But when you come back, you have to remember things.
Yeah.
I don't remember anything. So the project itself is saying it to me. Hey, Cassie, this collection of assets is called export. I wonder why. No, and the others is something else. Shapes, because I have shapes for the bones. Oh, I'm not going to export that. Like, you know, if it's named, I don't have to use my brain for memorizing which final version is the final for sure true, which is very necessary. Yeah, and in no place that I worked on, any artist, anyone was like, yeah, here, have the file, I'm sending it to you. No. With different scopes, because Flying Ship was HTML, and that meant that for a long time we couldn't preview our stuff in the game. Mm-hmm. That was interesting, but we had a previewer of the model at least, so we had to do that before pushing those changes, and then tell the developer, I pushed I think they are JSONs, I don't remember anymore, JSON files, you can implement them now, and let's see. But for Unity, the only thing that you don't have to take care anymore as an artist is the interaction stuff on top of it. I would say that if you're working with Unity, you also make a prefab instead of just having the mesh around, but that's up to your team.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, and I think we're gonna call it here.
Okay.